U.S. President Donald Trump lashes out against the media over coverage of the Russia probe and questions about his son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. With his first foreign trip completed, Donald Trump returned to the White House to face more challenges. According to media reports, senior advisor Jared Kushner is under FBI scrutiny for his relationship with Russian officials during the transition period before Trump took office. In December, at a meeting with the Russian Ambassador Sergey Kislyak, Kushner reportedly discussed creating secret back-channel communications between the Trump transition team and the Kremlin through a Russian diplomatic facility. We begin our coverage with CGTN's Jessica Stone at the White House. And Jessica, how is the Trump administration responding to these reports about Jared Kushner?
Well, they're not giving us very much information at all. You know, we asked Sean Spicer at the White House press briefing earlier today about Jared's status, about his involvement in these reports. And Press Secretary Sean Spicer basically pointed to what he's already said about Jared Kushner, and his lawyer has already said about Jared Kushner, which is that he is going to talk to the congressional committees, he's going to talk to the FBI about what he knows. Also attacking the reports himself. Sean Spicer repeatedly attacking the source of these reports, saying that they're anonymous sources, that these are unconfirmed actions, that he doesn't want to dignify them with a response, and also noting the Department of Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly and the National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster's statements over the weekend, which basically said there are instances where creating these back channels can be appropriate and in which they're actually routine.
Now, President Trump described his first overseas trip. He's just got back. He described it as a great success. But after the visit, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel said Europe can no longer rely on Donald Trump's America. Where do relations stand between these two leaders?
Well, I think one of the highlights of the briefing today was that question being put to Sean Spicer, and he said that the relations between Angela Merkel and Donald Trump are, frankly, fairly unbelievable, he said. He really went on to describe what he felt was a positive relationship between these two countries, arguing really that the substance of what the president was trying to convey is that each country in NATO contributing more to the alliance does help not only the alliance, but Europe and the United States. I'll have you take a listen, though, to that question being asked, because, of course, there were concerns raised by the fact that the president didn't articulate a full-throated endorsement of Article 5, the mutual defense part of the treaty with NATO, and also that caused German Chancellor Angela Merkel a lot of consternation. She made some remarks as well afterwards. I'll have you listen to what Sean Spicer said in response to those. Take a listen.
I think the relationship that the president has had with Merkel, he would describe as fairly unbelievable. They get along very well. He has a lot of respect for her. They continue to grow the bond that they had during their talks in the G7. And he views not just Germany, but the rest of Europe as an important American ally. During his conversations at NATO and at the G7, the president reaffirmed the need to deepen and improve our transatlantic relationship.
And of course, one of the other sore points between these two allies is climate, something that German Chancellor Angela Merkel really wanted to be in the communique. The U.S. did not endorse that, and it didn't wind up being in the communique that was ultimately issued from the G7. No full endorsement of the Paris Climate Agreement. We know that the president came back and said he's fully considering whether to stay in, and we expect that decision sometime this week. Anand.
Thanks, Jessica. That's CGTN's Jessica Stone reporting from the White House. Now, for more on the Trump administration's troubles, joining us is Afshin Molavi. He's a senior fellow with the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Also with us is Ray McGovern. He was an analyst for the Central Intelligence Agency for 27 years. Joining us from his Washington headquarters is Simon Marks. He's the president and chief correspondent for Feature Story News. And Lester Munson served as staff director for the Republican chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and is currently the vice president with BGR Group, a strategic consulting firm. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Let's go to Simon out there. Simon, if we look at this presidency, there hardly a day goes by when something bizarre happens. You know, we hear these allegations coming from the media, coming from officials. There's always something when Donald Trump is in the news. We now have a special prosecutor in place as well. Looking at the past 4 months and just looking at the past 2 weeks after the president had this foreign visit, are we looking at a presidency that's becoming crippled, really?
Well, I think a presidency that is becoming constrained, Anna, not entirely crippled, because remember, while Donald Trump is mired in crisis and the White House is mired in crisis, there is still the business of government getting done in a very small way, at a very low level at government departments all over the country, and certainly environmentalists, for example, would argue that Donald Trump, even though he's dealing with a political crisis, is already doing damage to the country's environment. There are other interest groups that would argue that Donald Trump is bringing a hatchet to their particular areas of concern. But there is no question that this is going to constrain him in a very big way when it comes to the big items that he wants to advance through Capitol Hill. His relationship with the legislature, particularly with the Senate, is becoming increasingly strained. You hear more skepticism among Republicans in the Senate about the future of his presidency with every day that passes. And with every day that passes, there just is this increasing sense that there is now so much smoke that somewhere there must be a fire burning, and the White House is able to do nothing to dampen down that sense, despite the presentation that Sean Spicer made there today, and perhaps, if he's still around tomorrow, will make there again tomorrow.
Ray, let's look at this latest bit of news that's got Washington talking, and that is that the president's son-in-law and one of his senior advisors, Jared Kushner, tried to establish some kind of secret communications line with the Russians. This was in the transition period, as we've been reporting. Now, we don't know whether this is true. This is what the media has been telling us. But what do you make of it?
Well, what I make of it is we don't know if it's true. It's always 3 former and retired CIA officials or something. So, you know, what we're dealing with is a sort of unreality here. This is the media. They're having a wonderful time, but there's very little substance to what they're saying. They're trying to cripple the president. You know, whatever you think of the president, I don't think very much of him. He was elected properly by the electorate here. If the Hoi Aristoi, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the New York Times think they can get rid of them, well, you know, they're well on their way to doing that. But if they think that the 68 million people who voted for him are going to sit still for that, we have a real crisis that we haven't seen the likes of before in electoral history.
Afshin, what do you make of that? President Trump and his advisors are constantly complaining that this is fake news. And admittedly, a lot of the news is anonymously sourced.
Sure. There's a whole lot of leaking going on. I mean, I'm surprised Washington hasn't flooded with all this leaking that's going on in town. But look, I mean, I think, you know, to Ray's point, you know, and you know, playing on Simon's point as well, yes, there's a lot of smoke, but you know, these are not, you know, Jared Kushner setting up a meeting with a Russian businessman is not technically illegal. Yeah. It's poor judgment, it's reckless, it's ill-considered, but it's not technically illegal. So there's going to be a lot of investigative reporters looking for the fire that Simon was referring to. Right. But in the meantime, I think that, you know, what we're seeing is Donald Trump supporters hardening, you know, their support for Donald Trump because they think the elite media, to Ray's point, is out to get them. And let's also not forget that Bill Clinton had similar poll numbers at this stage of his presidency as Donald Trump.
Right, Lester, I want you to take a listen to what the U.S. Secretary for Homeland Security, John Kelly, had to say about these Jared Kushner allegations. Let's watch.
Just because you have a back channel, if indeed that's what Jared was after, doesn't mean that he then keeps everything secret. I mean, he shares that. But the back channels, as I understand it, and of course every administration has had it all the way, you know, forever. Back channel communications with people are ways to communicate with people. Again, not in front of the, you know, press as an example, but that information is, you know, not necessarily kept secret from the rest of the government.
So, Lester, is there anything illegal that Jared Kushner, even if this is true, is there anything illegal that he did, or is it unusual in any way? Is this the first time that we've heard of members of a campaign establishing back channels with other governments?
I don't think it's illegal. I do think if the allegations are true, there are some unusual aspects to this. if Mr. Kushner actually asked to have the meetings at the Russian embassy where they would be hidden from U.S. eyes and ears, that would be a kind of an unusual scenario. But again, these are unsubstantiated allegations. We don't know if this happened. We don't know if he tried to set up a channel. We also don't know if he actually used the channel. And one of the interesting aspects to me is the primary accusation against President Trump is that he has this inappropriate relationship with the Russian government. If he has that, why does he need to set up a secret back channel? Presumably, he already has that somewhere. So, I mean, there is a lot of smoke here, but it might be funny smoke, and I'm not really sure there is a fire.
And the question, Anand, is Vladimir Putin laughing in Moscow right now and saying, you know, I've set off a lot of smoke bombs in that town, and everybody's looking for the fire?
He is definitely laughing.
Simon, the media's taking a whipping here. What do you say?
Well, let me push back a little bit against that, Anand, because these are not entirely unsubstantiated allegations, and this is not a series of stories that is the invention of the media. I mean, there are some very clear, hard and fast facts. We know now that a substantial number of figures in Donald Trump's immediate orbit are the subject of a series of separate investigations. One in the Senate, two in the House of Representatives, now the subject of an investigation being spearheaded by a special counsel appointed by the Deputy Attorney General after Donald Trump's decision, not the media's decision, not the Democratic Party's decision, the president's decision to fire his FBI director, publicly claim at the time that he was doing it because James Comey did a terrible job of handling the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email use, but in every subsequent reference constantly appears to be suggesting that he fired the FBI director in order to derail or take out the sting of the Russia probe that James Comey was heading at the FBI. Now, those are substantiated facts, and so the media would be utterly remiss in its duty if it didn't continue to investigate all of these various stories and allegations, which, of course, are being fueled by the fact that Donald Trump's own White House, his White House, leaks like a sieve to a greater degree than any of its predecessors. So this is by no manner of means all on the media.